Thank you so much, Andreas. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, MCC, for the invitation. It's a great pleasure. I just heard yesterday that the Federal Trade Commission in the US has started to decide to kick off some unfair method of competition in order to kind of regulate mostly platform regulations. And so perhaps fortunately or unfortunately, the institutional constraints in the US are very strong, so it's going to be very complicated for the Federal Trade Commissions to go forward in terms of unfair method of competition. But that's not the case in Europe. In Europe, we went very quick and very fast forward. In a sense, the European Commission submitted and proposed the Digital Markets Act in December 2020, and the Digital Market Act just entered in force this month. So it's an extremely quick process with very little institutional constraint in order to regulate big tech or big corporation operating as a platform. And this is the first regulation in the world. It's going to move fast. That's the timetable for the adoption of the DMA. If everything goes well, the obligations and prohibitions in the DMA will be effective perhaps in March, August 2024. That's in the best case scenario. More realistically, but that's what if large corporations don't complain, don't challenge any kind of European Commission decisions. And I bet with very expert lawyers, they will challenge, and very competently. So I think we're talking about obligations and prohibitions that won't apply in 2024, and perhaps will apply 25, 26, because of judicial review, because of appeal before the European Court. So, and yet, again, the European Commission has moved very quickly, and Europe, well, in that sense, lead the world in terms of tech regulations. But my point today is just very simple. The EU leads the world, but it will lead the world as a world leader in regulation and not in innovation. So this piece of regulation is a piece of regulation over regulation and, of course, harming innovation. I'm going to make my point very, very quickly, very simple. These are the unintended consequences of the DMA. We talk about fragmentations. We have the DMA in order to reduce fragmentations. We're going to have increased fragmentation. We have the DMA to increase innovation. We're going to have increased precaution, where basically the DMA is the precautionary principle in competition. So let's start with the fragmentation. So the goal of the DMA is to say, well, we have a beautiful digital single market. Let's complete it. Let's make sure there's no regulatory barriers. That's the state goal. As Mathias has said, the legal basis of the DMA is Article 114, which says, basically, we have to harmonize, we want to complete, we want to regulate, because we are afraid of some potential regulatory barriers between the member states, right? We want to complete. But actually, the reality won't be that. The reality is a risk of complete decentralized enforcement. And why is that so? I mean, it's not the goal of the European Commission. It wasn't the goal of the European Commission. But you know what? There's politics in Europe. And between December 2020, when the European Commission submitted the proposal and the adoption, you had a wide range of member states, the so-called Friends of the Effective Digital Markets Act, which are France, Germany, and Poland, which just said, you know what, we don't want the European Commission as the sole enforcer of the DMA. Basically, because we are powerful national competition authority, we're going to enforce it, and we're going to just take care of it. So during the perhaps 16 months of negotiation process within the European institutions, they just pushed for many amendments in the European Parliament and the Council, so that we end up with the latest version of the DMA, which gives a lot of room for national competition authorities, for decentralized enforcement, and therefore for increased fragmentation. So first, you have this high-level group where the national competition authorities will be part of, and you can assume that they will pressure the European Commission. If you don't start an investigation on that, Well, we'll do it ourselves at home, right? Under these national competition rules. Also, you have 3 member states can request a market investigation by the European Commission, just basically force the European Commission of starting a market investigations. 3 member states. What are 3 member states? It's not necessarily the biggest 3 member states. It can be Germany, Luxembourg, and Malta, and you're done. And you force the European Commission. It can be Cyprus, Malta, and Estonia. Right? I mean, it can be any tiny free coalitions of states just displeased with some behavior, and they force. And just think of the political pressure of the European Commission issuing the decision saying, no, we don't want to start a market investigations. No, there's nothing to investigate here. I mean, is it a credible outcome? Like when 3 member states asking the European Commission say, I think there's something perhaps unfair or anti-competitive. What's the political, realisticness of the European Commission say, no, I just want to close my eyes. I don't want to investigate on that. Of course, those 3 member states, however big they are, they will convincingly and forcefully influence the Commission. And that's the nuclear weapon will be that even if the European Commission doesn't want to open market investigations, well, you have national investigations under Article 38, paragraph 7. The DMA allows for national investigations. The member states will ask the European Commission to investigate. If the European Commission, for whatever reason, very unlikely, doesn't want to investigate, the member state will say, that's fine. We consider it as unfair under our own national competition rules, which, by the way, we can complement on the basis of the German model. We're going to consider it unfair. And we're going to consider it, and we're going to sanction them in our territory. What does it mean? It means that what will be considered unfair in Germany will be considered fair in Poland, which will be considered fair in Slovenia or in Hungary. Isn't this fragmentation of the single market, where you have exactly the same product, same service, same behavior, same companies, considered fair in one state, unfair in the other? This is exactly the Pandora box for fragmentation of the single market. I mean, you can cover the lid of the Pandora box, it's just open. So it's going to be very hard for the European Commission just to refrain from this political pressure. I mean, it's politics. It's like, we're talking about big tech, and you have these very angry national politicians which just can make a career going after big tech. So it's very hard for the European Commission to not follow those pressures, and even if they don't want to follow those pressures, the national competition authorities, national agencies will just carry on under their own national rules, which, by the way, they can complete following the German model. So the outcome is what we call in Europe the cost of non-Europe. The cost, you know, there was this Cecchini report in 1988, said like, what's the cost of not having the single market, having all these regulatory barriers between member states? The cost is tremendous. It's what economists will call opportunity cost, transaction cost, right? So this cost is enormous. And since 1998, we know there's a huge cost of non-Europe. And the European Commission is well aware of the cost of not having a completed digital single market. I mean, you have to trust me. This is from the European Parliament. This is the cost that has been traced by the research service of the Europe Parliamentary Research Service. It was the cost of non-Europe between 2014 and 2019. Look at the greatest cost of non-Europe in Europe is basically single market for consumers, and second is the digital single market. 400 billion euros every 5 years. So what I'm saying is we have the DMA in order to reduce fragmentation, we'll have the DMA and it will increase fragmentation. And this increased fragmentation is not just like some regulatory barriers where some practices and product can be considered unfair in one country and the other one. It's just the cost of doing business. It's the cost of small businesses, small startups in Europe to scale up in the gatekeepers' ecosystem. It's the cost of gatekeepers to provide investment in Europe. These are all the costs that you won't see, that, as Frederic Bastiat would say, it's the unseen. But this unseen is way costlier than the seen. And that's the cost of non-Europe. So the DMA, because of the pressure also basically of some member states like France, Germany, Poland, the so-called friends of the effective digital single market, the European Commission had to subsume to some powerful member states. And we end up having just the worst of both worlds, which is a very strong regulatory piece of legislation with fragmentation. Anyway, not so good. And the second aspect is increased precaution. We want innovation. Yeah, we always talk about innovation. What we're going to have is increased status quo, less disruption. Why? Because it's this shift from ex-post competition rules, right? Basically, you compete, and then if there's some issue, you go in court and you assess the stuff, right? To an ex-ante rules of competition where you say, I'm going to tell you what is unfair, what is prohibited up front, and even if it's pro-competitive or if it's pro-efficient or pro-innovation, it's still prohibited. And this shift, I mean, if you look at the European Commission working papers, the reports, the reports that were before the so-called new competition tool, because they framed that as a new competition tool, all this philosophy is inspired by the precautionary principle. First, a reverse burden of proof. The regulator doesn't have to demonstrate the harm or doesn't have to demonstrate, is potentially the gatekeeper who may have to provide some justifications, even hardly so, in order to be authorized to do something, right? So default rules is the prohibition, the exception is authorization. That's the complete reverse burden of proof. Second of all, no demonstrated harm. I mean, I bet you find the word harm in the Digital Market Act. There's no harm. There's no consumer harm. It's not about harm. The word harm doesn't appear. It's not about harm. You know what it's about? It's about market structure. The change of market structure may not harm consumers, but still, we want to preserve the market structure. It's all about preservation. And the two risks that the European Commission identified in order to kick off the Digital Market Act were the competitive risk to the structure of the market and the structural risk to competition. Basically, what I'm saying is it's all about the risks assessment. DMA is about risk assessment rather than a traditional cost-benefit analysis where you look at the benefits and the harm and you just balance out in court. The DMA is about the risks of changing the market structure. As soon as the market structure may change, or as they call it, TIP, then that's a justification for intervention. And that is a complete different. And also the irreversible situation saying that we have to act quickly, also the rational, quick, speed intervention, because the situation will be irreversible. The idea of market tipping. This irreversibility of harm is exactly what is in the precautionary principle from environmental law and from other areas of law. The irreversibility of the situation. Even though market competition always is irreversible, I mean, those entrenched market positions, you see that at the end of the day, they're not that entrenched. But yet, this belief that they will be entrenched and they will be forever entrenched. Second of all, it's increased precaution, because even if you say, okay, I have some prohibitions and obligations, whatever, can I raise a question? Can I raise some evidence? Can I raise some justifications? No. No justification. If you say, hey, you know what? I do that because the consumer gain. Or you know what? I do that because the consumer want it. No justification, no efficiency defense. You cannot justify your behavior on the basis that the consumer gained from that. Second of all, you cannot justify this behavior on the basis that you're building innovation or you're entering markets. Just think of leveraging. If you want to, as a large firm, as a gatekeeper, you want to enter a market and challenge the incumbents over there. I mean, one key example is just think that something that everybody will agree is Amazon Pharmacy. When Amazon wants to enter into pharmaceutical market, is to challenge the pharmacist. I mean, we all pay too high drug price, right? Everybody would be happy to have the drug price down, like kind of Amazon price. And yet, that could be seen as not a good excuse, like a bundling or leveraging or whatever behavior that is prohibited by the DMA. So there's no ability for those companies just to justify their behavior on the basis of innovation. The European Commission is close to discussions. That's why I'm a bit skeptical of Jean Tirole idea of participative antitrust. I think it's participative when the other party has just a gun pointed at you and say like, well, at the end of the day, you comply. If you don't comply, I sue you, I break you up. So it's very hard. I think participative will need to have an equal balance where you can bring arguments. And that's also the fair process. And that's why I'm very skeptical of the DMA, because I think the best defender of the European consumers and the best challenger of the DMA, you know what would be? Would be the General Court, the European Court of Justice. Because at the end of the day, the principle of proportionality, fair process, due process, the fact that companies, defendants, need to be heard and to raise arguments, that's a fundamental right. That's part of the Charter of Fundamental Rights, which is part of the European treaties. And that's how you end up in cases like Qualcomm and Intel, where 10 years after, the European court say, no, your economic analysis was wrong. So you have a 1 billion fine annual, just because at the end of the day, you need to hear the economic analysis and you need to hear the economic evidence. So the DMA tries to ignore, try to silence those legitimate justifications, but at the end of the day, I'm optimistic that those justifications will be brought before the General Court and the European Court of Justice. And finally, why is it precaution? Well, I don't think the DMA will increase legal certainty because, I mean, in this large company, you have these product engineers which just come with a great idea, say like, oh, I have a new product, a new service, and then they want to implement it, they want to commercialize it, and then they're going to ask the council, let's say, can we do that? Can we? There will be a massive deterrence in putting this product into the market because of the legal uncertainty, because they will be completely regulated. So, well, wait a minute, but our competitors is already doing it. Yes, but the competitor is just below those quantitative threshold and is not regulated by the DMA. And so that's the legal uncertainty where companies which are in a very similar market positions, right? Because if you fall below the quantitative thresholds, you're not regulated by the DMA. If you're above, you are. In companies that are in a very similar market situation, complete different regulatory framework with, of course, some uncertainty because some measures need to be determined and specified. And we look forward for the European Commission to have some implementing act on those aspects because we need certainty. And so all this legal uncertainty, what would it create? Would it create massive deterrence? It would create the aspect that companies say, you know what, let's not do something. Let's maximize our profits today rather than introduce new products and new services, right? That's what I heard also like Amazon. Why would Amazon care about Amazon Basics if they know it's going to be prosecuted at the end of the day? They don't make a lot of money with Amazon Basics. Why don't you say, well, you know what, we just run the platform. That's it. So it's not something that is completely inconsequential. I mean, the companies will really think twice before introducing products and services that will disrupt what? The market structure that the DMA is precisely intending to preserve. So how can a company say, you know what, we want to precisely disrupt the market? Well, you know what? The regulation tells you that you have to precisely preserve the market structure. How can you square that all in with the mindset of the entrepreneur and the enforcers just being willing to preserve the status quo of the market? I think there will be a massive tension, and the collateral damages will be consumers and innovation. And so all this is very unfortunate. It's very unfortunate because we have a neighbor here who was an economist, Joseph Schumpeter, who just always talked about precisely the idea of disrupting the market. And the DMA is not so much about fair competition. It's about not too much of a fierce competition. Like, we don't want the fierce competition, the disruptive competition from those large corporations. We want the fair competition whenever it means slow, what economists will call static competition. We want this competition that is slow, price marginal. You have the same product, yeah, you can compete on price, that's fine. Compete through disruptive innovation, that's too dangerous. It will change the market structure. And that is exactly the essence of the DMA. We want fairness, fair competition, which means static competition, which means marginal rivalry, but not displacement. We don't want the displacement effect of the capitalism. And yet, Joseph Schumpeter precisely said that the essential fact of capitalism is the displacement effect, which what he called innovation and what he called as creative destruction. The ability of company to change the market structure, to kick out inefficient competitors, is precisely the drive of entrepreneurs. That's why companies enter into the market. So the DMA is about contestability and making sure that companies enter the market. We're just making sure that companies can enter less the market because the rewards are lower and because the legal risks are incredibly higher. So by ignoring this process of creative destruction, we not only ignore capitalism, we ignore the process of innovation. Very interestingly, I was at a Georgetown conference, I think 2 weeks ago, and Mathias, who is in charge of the DMA at the European Commission, explicitly said, and I think it's recorded, it's on YouTube, it's very interesting. He said, the DMA, it's not about Schumpeterian competition. He said it up front. He said it's not about Schumpeterian competition. It's about kind of arrow competition, like a marginal competition. You can compete. You compete on price. That's fine. But disrupting, kicking out some inefficient competitors for the benefit of consumers, no, we don't like that in the European Commission. So it's very interesting to at least ignore innovation from Europe, in Europe, by European business that can scale up through those gatekeepers and through those platforms in order to thrive. So the conclusion is the DMA is about precautionary aspects, what a very great legal scholar, Cass Sustained, called the laws of fear. The precautionary principle is about the laws of fear. You just fear an hypothetical risks that never materialized. So broadly, the DMA is interesting because it's a shift. It's a shift between the error cost framework to something of a risk assessment. In competition law, traditionally, we know the trade-off between false positive and false negative. What is the cost of regulating? What is the cost of non-regulating? Here, the European Commission doesn't really care, hasn't assessed the cost of regulating or cost of non-regulating. It's all about perception, risk assessment. Is there a risk? Yes, there is a risk, so we intervene. It's a shift from a cost-benefit analysis, from an economic analysis, to a perception, a subjective perception of, yes, there's something unfair or something risky, and we want to intervene before it's too late. It's the better safe than sorry. That's the essence of the precautionary principle. You intervene first, well, and then you see what happens. So there's a fundamental opposition between precaution and innovation. The European Union is very keen to have the precautionary principle as a matter of principle, and now I think the precautionary principle enters into competition law principles through the DMA. So at the end of the day, the EU, yes, will be a world leader in regulation, but it will be a world leader in regulation, not necessarily in innovation. We talk about the Brussels effect, the fact that, yeah, the European regulations just expand globally. That's great. But I think there may be another effect, which may be the repulsion effect. Just think of small European startups. You want to create an app. where would you go? Would you go to in some small markets, the Hungarian market, German market, or Slovenian market, or French market, whatever? Or you just go to the Silicon Valley and scale up and have a huge market? So what I'm saying is, we failed with the DMA to complete the digital single market, to have no regulatory barriers between member states, because we will have regulatory barriers, and I think it can only get worse. And that additionally, more than fragmentation, we'll have deterrence, we'll have innovation deterrence through a precautionary attitude where whatever is related with disruptions will be seen skeptically. And that is fundamentally wrong. It's ignoring the process of creative destruction, which itself is ignoring capitalism in innovation. Thank you.